Okay, well, this is my presentation, and this is just telling you that I am who I am and we are where we are. So we'll let that be. Let's see. I gotta find my controls. Sorry about that. I want to make sure I can see my controls. Doo -doo -doo. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry, I should have set this up a little bit earlier. Can't see my controls. Why can I not see my controls? Manually advance slides. I got that. Well, I can't see my controls. Anybody have any advice? Oh, boy, that was, I guess if I go that way.
Are you just trying to advance the
Yeah, just go
slides?
sideways. Yeah.
Can you just hit your little arrow buttons on your keyboard?
Oh, there we go. Okay, so thank you. I was doing that and nothing happened. So I don't know what was going on. Okay, now I'm ready. Sorry. So this is my presentation, a brief look at Japanese poetry forms offered in two parts. It is in two parts tonight. The first part is very short. It isn't part one. It's just one presentation. So I already talked about haiku, so I'm not going to do that. But I wanted to ask this question really quickly before we get started. And I can't see the people, but maybe Sarah E., you could be the counter of raised hands. But in this moment, before we go into Japanese poetry forms that I'm going to be talking about, I just wondered what's in your gut instinct? What is the style that, meets your poet's soul right now? Traditional Japanese forms or freestyle Japanese forms? So if you want to raise your hands because you love number one, go ahead and do that. And Sarah E. can be, oh, she can be admitting people and counting hands. And then maybe we'll do the number two freestyle count just as soon as people have gotten into the meeting here for just a second.
So far, I counted 2 for traditionals.
Mm-hmm. And how do we feel about freestyle?
I see 1, 2.
Okay. So we're tied. That's okay. If you're not sure, that's perfect because hopefully by the end of the presentation, you might have a preference. Who knows? So I want to say before I get started on actually talking about Japanese poetry forms, that I am not an expert in Japanese language, Japanese culture, Japanese writing. What I'm going to be focusing on tonight, hopefully, is more about kind of like the traditional structure of some of these Japanese forms, a little bit about how they came to be or what we might want to think about in terms of their historical tradition and all that type of thing. But then also just looking at these forms as how we as poets can maybe play around with them a little bit. So that's really I just don't want anybody to think that I'm some kind of an expert in Japanese poetry forms because I'm not. I just love them like a lot of us do. And I also want to make sure that you all understand that it's been a long time since I was in any of my linguistics courses. And so I beg you to bear with me on my pronunciation errors when I do try to pronounce anything that is a Japanese word or name, because I'm not good at that. So, okay, so moving on. Part one, we're going to start with a little bit about grammar, and this is very brief. I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding, or at least a basic understanding, of the distinction between the phonetic units or sound units in the two languages that I'll be talking about. In Japanese, these are called on, and in English, we usually refer to these as syllable. And so just keep that in mind. If you see the word on, that's the Japanese sound unit count. And if I say or reference syllable, that would be an English sound unit count. And those two things, we'll talk about the distinctions a little bit. And then I also want to mention Kurichi, the cutting word that is in some Japanese poetry forms. So on, let's talk about on for a minute. On means sound, literally, and on are the Japanese language sound units that are counted in some haiku forms like haiku, tanka, and other poetic forms like that. In English language discussions of Japanese poetry, we're usually using the word syllable. It's more common to do that, and that's fine. The use of syllable is a little bit inaccurate though, and because there's not that one-to-one ratio between on and syllable. However, sometimes English language syllable count and Japanese language on count do match when, translating Japanese language poetry into English. The difference between syllables and on becomes clearer when you are counting those translated sounds from English language versions of Japanese poems. And another great way to look at this distinction is by looking at some well-known Japanese place names. So I have this handy dandy chart, which I really like because I think it makes it pretty clear. If you look at the highlighted columns, you have the on column and you have the syllables column. And it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that the only place name, this well-known Japanese place name is Nagasaki, is the only one where the pronunciation in Japanese and in English has the same sound unit count. In all the others, there's a different sound unit count. And I found that to be very interesting, but I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but I thought that this would be a good illustration visually of that difference between on and syllable. Okay, so then we'll talk a little bit about the Kurichi. Literally, that means cutting word. And you can also think of this as the turn. You hear in poetry, you hear about the turn a lot, and that's what this is. Kurichi is the term for a special category of emphasis and or words used in certain types of Japanese traditional poetry. It's a requirement, as most of you know, in traditional haiku and in the hoku or opening verse of both classical renga and its derivative renku, or Haikai no renga. There's no exact equivalent of Kurichi in English, and its function can be kind of hard to define or explain. It usually is thought of as supplying some sort of structural support. So for example, when it's placed at the end of a verse, it provides a dignified ending, if you will, concluding that verse with a heightened sense of closure. If it's in the middle of a verse, it briefly cuts or turns the stream of thought, indicating that the verse consists of two distinct, half-independent kind of thoughts related to each other in a way. And in that position, it usually indicates a pause, both rhythmically and grammatically, and it might even lend an emotional flavor to the phrases preceding it. And in English language haiku, for example, and in translations of Japanese verses into English, Kurichi can also be represented by punctuation, typically an end dash or an ellipses, or by specific words like how or why, or, this is the hard part, simply left unmarked. You just have to intuit the turn. That's hard for me, but I think that's an interesting way to think about this idea of the turn, the cutting word. And when you're working on writing poetry that includes a turn or a Kurichi, think of your poem as a journey that the reader is going on. And the Kurichi makes the reader take a turn in the journey. So that ends the grammar lesson. It's very short. Yay! I like a short grammar lesson. Oops, sorry. So now we're going to have a little short 3-minute break. I know we just sat down, but I want you to get out of your chairs and swing your arms around, do some jumping jacks, go to the restroom if you have to, go grab a drink or some food, just move for like 3 minutes and then come back. Yeah, Sarah E's going like that. I can see you, Sarah E. So that's good. Just move around for just a minute. Get a little bit of blood flowing before we go into part 2. I can't see everybody, so I don't know if people are doing it, but do a little dance in your butt dance in your chair or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, Marlene and I got this little chair sway going.
There you go. Now. Let's do that for about a minute. Maybe we don't need to take a full 3 minutes. Maybe we'll just do like 1 minute. Sarah E., if you can see everybody, let me know when you feel like they're kind of bored and want to move on. Or they're all back in their seats. Because again, I originally I thought I was going to be going after Joe, and so I may have put this first movement thing in a little too soon. But anyway, I did want to get some blood flowing. So yeah.
Okay, well, you had several people doing the legit moves here.
All right. Do you feel like we're ready to move on, everybody?
I think we are.
Okay. All right. Then we'll go right into part 2. And these are the Japanese forms that I'm going to talk about: Renga, Haikai, Senryu, Waka or Tenka, and then a little bit about Choka. And so the first one is Renga, which is linked verse, and it's a genre of Japanese poetry that's collaborative. Very interesting to me. And the form is kind of like in alternating stanzas of 5/7/5 and 7/7 sound units, linked in succession by multiple poets, at least 2, let's say. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. Renga originated in a 2-verse poetry exchange that was begun by Yamamoto Takeru, and I'm probably not pronouncing that name correctly, and I apologize. And it gave birth to the genres of haikai and haiku, which I love the connection between some of these forms, and I'm going to try to remember to say something about that when I have that in my notes. Renga were usually composed and transcribed during live gatherings of poets, but Renga could also be composed non-orally by single poets working together in text form. So Renga is really a fun thing. We all love collaborative poetry, right? So here we have this ancient tradition of collaborative poetry. Renga was elevated to literary art by Yoshimoto, and he compiled the first imperial Renga anthology in 1356. I don't want to try to pronounce it, but it's like Sukubashu or something like that. I'm not good with the pronunciations, but you can Google him, Yoshimoto, and find out more about that. Now, most of you have heard of Soji, possibly the most famous Renga master. And I want to share with you in the next slide are going to be the first 6 verses of the Minasi Sangen Hayukun, which was published in 1488. And the translated title is a poem of 100 links composed by 3 poets at Minasi. That's a mouthful. And it was written, the Renga was written by Soji, Shohaku, and Socho. There's going to be some information on the slides, I should tell you, like dates and things that I'm not going to say out loud because I'm not good with dates and things. I just figured I'd put that up there for you guys to see. So here we go. And I apologize for how small the text is, but I wanted it to be all on one slide. I hope you can see it. I'm going to read it out loud for you just in case you can't see it. As it snows, the base of the mountain is misty this evening. Far in the way the water goes, a plum blossom smelling hamlet. The wind from the river sways weeping willows, now it's spring. The pole of a boat makes a clear sound at dawn. The moon must be visible even in a foggy night. Frost on the field, autumn at its end. Now, Soji wrote verses 1 and 4, Shohaku wrote verses 2 and 5, and Socho wrote verses 3 and 6. So let's take a minute and look back at that first verse, which is a haiku that's by Soji. As it snows, the base of the mountain is misty this evening. Just absorb that for a second. Okay. So poetry is mutually inspiring, and this is collaborative poetry across forms and even across time. Soji's haiku was written in 1488, was actually inspired by a waka that was written circa 1180 to 1239, and this is the waka. I look over the misty base of the mountain where the Minase River runs through. Why did they say the evening was best in autumn? So I just find that so fascinating, don't you? I just think that's great that there's this connection across time and space with these 2 poems. My next form I'm going to talk about, see how fast we're going through these? This is going to be great, is a haikai, which is kind of like comic and unorthodox genre of Japanese linked verse poetry. And haikai refers to haikai no renga or renku in both Japanese and English languages. And it's a development of the Japanese poetic tradition of Ushin renga that began in the 16th century from earlier aristocratic Renga. Traditionally, Haikai doesn't always refer to regular Renga or Waka. It's not the same thing. Traditionally, Haikai poems were vulgar or earthy and often satire or puns. I think we can all appreciate those. I'm thinking of Sarah E.'s bathroom poetry in her presentation. But at Haikai or Renku gatherings, participating poets would take turns providing alternating verses of 17 and 14 sound units. And under Matsuo Basho, who lived from 1644 to 1694, he became the most famous Haikai master. And under his influence, the tone of Haikai no Renga became much more serious. And it also can be used to refer to other poetic forms that embrace that same aesthetic, including haiku, senryu, haiga, and haibun. And speaking of haiga, I'm going to have a little segue here. This is a sample of haiga. Haiga is haikai and art. So it's a short form poem and artwork. And I just thought this was a beautiful image. And the poem is just a little cuckoo across a hydrangea, but there's just something about the simplicity and the beauty of this that I really love. So I wanted to share that with you. And that leads us to our next little break. And this one is actually, I do want you to get up and move away from your chair and take some notes on something. You can do some movements and jumping jacks if you want, but I want you to get up, move for a second, or a minute, or whatever, and then let your eye fall upon a nearby object. And then jot down its colors, shape, function, size, how it makes you feel, anything except what it is called. Don't write down what it is. Write down all the other, I don't know, words you can think of to describe it, to feel it, to have its essence enter your soul. And I want you to save those notes for a little bit later in the workshop. We'll use those. So let's take a couple minutes and just, get up, move around for a minute, find an object you feel comfortable writing things down about, and jot down some notes to be used later. I'm going to do my arm movements, get my blood flowing. I'm thinking about 2 minutes is probably going to be plenty of time. Of course, I forgot to look at my clock when we started, so you guys can tell me when you're ready to move on. How's everybody doing? Do we feel like we're ready to move on, or do you want another minute? Sarah E., how's it looking?
So far I see a lot of hands that have quit scribbling.
Okay, so I'm going to take that to mean we're ready to move on. Okay. Next up, we're going to talk about, come on, it's not advancing. What is going on with my Oh, this is just crazy. There we go. I think I actually have to click with my cursor to make it go. That's so weird. Senryu. I'm going to talk longer than some of the other forms. I'm going to spend a lot of time on Senryu. Literally, this means river willow, and I just love that. I just love it so much. I think that's such a beautiful thing. And it's a genre of short form poetry similar to haiku that doesn't, or the poems don't adhere to haiku specific rules. So traditionally, Senryu structure is 3 lines with 17 on in a 5-7-5 pattern. They tend to be about human foibles. Unlike haiku, Senryu do not require a kigo, which hopefully some of you remember from my haiku presentation in one of our first Tuesdays. That's that seasonal word or reference to nature that traditional haiku requires. And also, unlike haiku, Senryu do not require, but often include a Kurichi, that cutting word or turn. And I think you'll see in some of the examples that I have for you to come that Kurichi in Senryu can really pack a powerful punch with this form of poetry. Senryu focuses on people, relationships, and portraying characteristics of human beings and the psychology of the human mind. It's very much about what it's all about to be human in the world. So again, a little bit more on that structure. The 3 lines with 17 on or syllables. Let's give it an either or sound unit language count. Line 1 is traditionally 5 on or syllables, describes an image. Line 2, 7 on or syllables, adding a conflicting image or expanding on that first image. Line 3, 5 on or syllables, provides an insight. Sometimes it will provide this Kurichi, that turn through a juxtaposed image, if you will. So back to, for a minute, don't you just love it when I backtrack? Back to my presentation title. Did any of you notice that it is a Senryu? A brief look at some Japanese poetry forms offered in 2 parts. I thought that was very clever. I don't know how clever it is, but I thought it was clever. Now, those of you who know me know that I am not fond of or good at math, and I like taking poetic license. So I decided to write a more creative alternative Senryu, which I wanted to share with you. This is my more creative one. Japanese poetry, tripping over syllables, emotional math. I like this one better than my presentation title, but it doesn't make a very good presentation title. So I kept my original poem as my presentation title, but this one hopefully lets you guys chuckle for a minute. Okay, so more Senryu elements. There's so many Senryu elements to talk about. I'm so excited. Natural human experiences using simple or humorous language. That's a feature that we kind of want to think about. Usually Senryu is presented with an energy or a liveliness in the focus and choice of words. That's a very vague statement, but as we learned today from the other people's presentations, from Sarah E.'s presentation and from George Ironstrack's presentation, word choice is something that we've been playing around with today, and we've been thinking a lot about today is language and which words we want to use. And so I think that kind of goes with this presentation and that kind of vague statement about Senryu elements. It's often written in the moment, so don't be discouraged if you know, or be encouraged to try and just write in the moment sometimes. Don't be discouraged if it's just not easy at first, because some of us like to spend a lot of time working on a poem before we feel like it's ready to be, you know, thought of as a real poem. And then Senryu are usually imagist poems. And by imagist, I mean that, you know, you're drawing emotion from the imagery. Both the author is and the reader does. And that's an important element, I think. And then they're usually untitled, like haiku, but they can be numbered and they can be titled if you want. I did want to give credit to the Edo period poet, Haikai poet Kairai Senryu, who is that's how Senryu got its name, is from Kairai Senryu, whose collection, which I cannot pronounce, but you can see it there. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. But that collection launched the genre of Senryu into the public consciousness. David, I know you have experience with Japanese. If you would like to give that a whirl, you can. Anybody who wants to give that a try before we go to the next slide? You got to unmute, David. David, can you unmute? There you go.
Finally. Yeah,
Okay.
I said, unfortunately, I was in Okinawa the whole time I was in Japan, and they're different from the mainlanders.
Sure.
And I was.
I wondered about that, but you're the only person I knew to ask. So, to give it a try.
I did not do well at Japanese.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it's intimidating to look at. I'm not going to try. But I do want to share an example from the collection. And this example actually has two translations, alternative translations. And one is "When I catch the robber, my own son." The second alternative translation is "Catching him, I see the robber is my son." I think both of those work. Show of hands, do you prefer number one or number two? Show of hands.
More people voted for number 2.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel that the turn is more, it's more powerful. There's something about it that just, is more identifiable to me. So I would have been in the voting for number 2 category as well. Thank you, Sarah E. Okay, even more about Senryu poems. Can you tell I just really have loved Senryu for a long time and was very excited to share all this with you. First of all, I want to say that there is a common misconception that it is exclusively a satirical and or humorous poetic genre. It did kind of start out that way, maybe, but it's not really true. Senryu express the full range of human emotions, from the comic to the tragic and everything in between. And Senryu poems, as we have seen, echo through time in both traditional and modern styles. Now, speaking of modern styles, R.H. Blythe has some superb translations of late 18th century to 20th century Japanese Senryu that provide examples that express more serious human moods and emotions. I'm going to share some of those with you. And you'll notice that the English translation syllable counts are not always the same as what I described as being that traditional 575 Japanese own sound counts. But don't worry about that. And in these poems I'm going to share with you, I'm going to share 3 poems from his collections. They're written by anonymous, are the authors. We don't know who wrote these poems, but these collections, Senryu Japanese Satirical Verses was published in 1949, and Japanese Life and Character in Senryu was published in 1960. So in this first poem, "The doctor killed him, but they expressed their thanks most graciously." This is a grief-stricken family members thanking the doctor in culturally traditional style, which evokes an even deeper sense of sadness. I think that's a really effective poem. I really liked that one a lot. The one that starts with the word gruesome. Gruesome is the age of 40 of a beautiful woman. The mindset in that poem is of a particular kind of despair, if you'll let me use that kind of a serious word, that of a beautiful woman facing aging. And in the third one, this is the one that just breaks my heart. In the third Senryu, only the child is portrayed. The step-parent is left to the reader's imagination, thus not only evoking compassion for the child, but also conveying the cruelty of the step-parent who is emotionally distant to the non-biological child. The stepchild, all day long, with his nose running. I mean, that just, that gets me every time. Now, Today, I should say in modern times, whatever, a growing number of contemporary English language poets are writing Senryu that convey a serious tone and that express the wider range of human emotions. And again, you'll notice that even with these, the English syllable counts do not always conform to traditional Senryu Japanese 575 on sound units. Here are 3 modern Senryu on illness. The first one by M. Frank Tieford, Nothing to Hide, The Eyes of a Child on Chemotherapy. The next one by Anita Virgil, On the Late Night Movie As I Try to Swallow Oatmeal, Madame Curie. And then the third one also by Anita Virgil, Hair Clumps Fill the Sink, In My Mirror a Face from Auschwitz. So you can see the power and the range just in one topic on illness, 3 poems, pretty incredible, I think. Then I wanted to share with you, there's quite a few here, but I wanted to share these with you, these examples of modern Senryu expressing, poignancy and sadness. The first one is anonymous. In The Beautiful Woman, the wife finds some defect. Oh man, that women hating women stuff, right? That's a good one. And then Man on a Crowded Street Hides His Loneliness with a Broken Cell Phone. That one's by Bob Brill. I think that's a really poignant poem. And then I Break Apart a Popsicle and Think of Divorce, Anita Krumans. The Old Widower Still Sleeping on His Side of the Bed, Jesse McGowan. That one is just so, it's beautifully written and so poignant. Arguing Downstairs, She Shuts the Windows in Her Dollhouse, Carol Raceford. And you'll see Carol put the turn in after the first line. I think that's kind of an interesting modern take on Senryu structure. And then this last one, The Pastor's Daughter, Her Sunday Dress, The Color of Bruises, also by Carol. I think those are just amazing, wonderful poems. Are you guys liking those? Do you feel like those are good examples of modern poetry? I hope so. So a few more. Oh, is there something in the chat? What does that say?
That was from a prior comment, but
Oh,
people
okay,
were just
sorry.
saying they did like it.
Oh, good. Okay. We'll move on to a few more modern Senryu about human suffering like war, tragedy, and violence. Mission accomplished. The Mind Planter shows off his prosthetic limbs. Al Pizzarelli. I think that's a great one. Of course, the benefit of being the presenter is that you can include one of your own poems in your presentation. Now, Without Speaking, Forever Ensconced Within, Rapists Never Leave. That's one of mine. Thank you very much. And then the other one by Steve Dalachinsky about the Twin Towers. He wrote this on September 14th, 2001, so 3 days after the event. Facing south, the old bum speaks to the vacant air. Very powerful. And these almost, become like the beginning of maybe social commentary, protest poetry. You can see that you can write these Senryu about the modern things, that are happening in your world. And the sparse language use is, I think, a very powerful and effective tool for a poet. I have a few, 3 more to share on other social issues that honestly, I could just have shared for hours the Senryu that I was finding. Shopping, I show my daughter how to handle a gun, Francis Massot. Losing his job, the siren sounds for others to work, Tominchi. Algebra class at Columbine, solving for why. That one makes me want to cry. It just breaks my heart. Barry George wrote that. I mean, these are amazing poems. And I think some of these modern Senryu, like I said, they almost are getting into the category of protest poetry. I feel like it's just a fine line there where it's making us think and making us, maybe raising awareness and maybe take some action and stuff, which is what protest poetry is supposed to do. Now, Senryu, let's lighten it up a bit. Senryu can also evoke subtle and delicate emotional experiences, and I found these two poems that I think are beautiful and poignant at the same time, but they're so finely tuned. Anita Virgil, a master of modern Senryu, the cracked cup gets packed better than the rest. I mean, that's philosophy, right? And then Matthew Louvier, I hope I said his name right, saying too much, the deaf girl hides her hands. These are just so beautiful, I feel like. And I know I said this earlier, but this bears repeating. Senryu expresses the full range of human emotions, from the comic to the tragic and everything in between. And Senryu poets echo through time in both traditional and modern styles. I feel emotionally drained, so let's have a little break. Okay, this time get up out of your chairs, breathe deeply, swing your arms, walk away, go from room to room, go outside. Then I want you to come back, use your notes from when you wrote down, those words and feelings and things about the item that you the object that you selected. Use those words and write a Senryu, or get some lines down that will become a Senryu, and save that poem for tonight's round robin if you feel comfortable sharing it. So let's take about 3 minutes for this one, because this is a writing prompt as well as movement. And just to give this a feeling of real movement, I'm going to leave my chair and go out in the hall and do some jumping jacks. So I'll be right back. How's everybody doing? Don't worry if you don't have a final Senryu. You'll be able to, work on it at your leisure too. But how's it looking, Sarah E? The people still writing, or are they heads up?
I think, well, I still see a few people writing. It's mostly heads up, 7 up.
Okay. All right. Okay, I think we'll go ahead then, if that's okay with everybody. So next I'm going to talk just a little bit about waka, which is short form poem. It's a genre of classical Japanese poetry and one of the major genres of Japanese literature. The term waka originally encompassed a number of forms, most notably tanka, choka, busokusakika, sidoka, and katauta. Those last four forms fell into disuse in the Heian period, and the term waka pretty much nowadays refers only to tanka poetry. So I wanted to at least mention a couple important works from the Heian period. The Pillow Book by Shonagon was completed in 1002. And the more famous or well-known, The Tale of Genji, written in the early 11th century by the noblewoman and lady-in-waiting Lady Murasaki. The Tale of Genji is considered the first novel by a lot of people. In her over 40-plus chapters, Murasaki uses 795 waka, all presented as waka that her characters create in the story. Some of those 795 waka are Murasaki's original poems, and some of them are from existing poems by other poets. I found that to be very fascinating. And in ancient times, waka was typically exchanged between writers instead of letters of prose. In particular, waka exchanges were popular between lovers. So the next time you're going to write a love note, do it in a waka. Do it with a waka, I should say. Making and reciting waka became a part of aristocratic culture, especially to mark a special occasion. Much like with tea, there were rituals and events surrounding the composition, presentation, and judgment of waka. And in ancient times, there were two types of waka parties that produced occasional poetry. And by occasional, I mean special occasion. And these were the Utakai Parties and the Utaawasi Parties. And Utakai Parties were for special occasions, and Utaawasi Parties were public team competitions. Now, the Utakai was a party in which all participants simply wrote a waka and recited them. And they were held when people gathered for occasions like seasonal parties for the new year, celebrations for a newborn baby, a birthday, or a newly built house, for example. Utaawasi parties were public team competitions. The first recorded Utaawasi was held circa 885. And Utaawasi was a contest between two teams, played in rounds of chosen themes. Each team would choose a different team poet to write for each round, so everybody got a chance to represent the team, right? The judge appointed a winning poem for each round and awarded the points to that winning team. And then the team with the greatest number of points after all the rounds were finished was declared the winning team. At first, Uta Awasi was just for fun, but as its popularity grew, it became a serious aesthetic contest with much more formality. Now, today's modern waka, or I'm trying to start using the word tanka here more because that's really what we're talking about, consists of 5 parts, and I put that in quote marks because that's kind of for lack of a better word, usually in separate lines, traditionally with a pattern of 5/7, 5/7/7 on or syllable sound units. And the 5/7/5 lines are the kami no ku, the upper phrase, and the 7/7 lines are the shimo no ku, the lower phrase. In 1980, those of you who are old enough to remember, the New York Times published a representative tanka by Ishikawa Takuboku, and I wanted to share it with you. On the white sand of the beach of a small island in the eastern sea, I, my face streaked with tears, am playing with a crab. Isn't that great? Don't you just love that? Okay, so I know we just had a break, so this little break is going to be a little bit shorter, but this is what I want you to try to do. Do kind of what we did before. Move around a minute, at least look around in the room that you're at, use your senses, jot down some words, phrases to describe your feelings that you're having right in this moment, colors you may see, smells you may smell, sounds you may hear, the texture of things you may touch. They can be natural, they can be man-made. Just write down some words and phrases from this moment. And I don't think we'll take a lot of time to actually write the tanka right now because I don't want to go over my time too much, but save these notes to write a 5-line tanka using that 5/7, 5/7/7 syllables or on count, sound unit count. And again, save your poem for the round robin tonight or for a first Tuesdays to come round robin or something. But this is a more general, just in the space you're in. Write down some words and phrases to describe this moment, this feeling, the colors, the smells, the sounds, the textures. And you can write down the word annoying for Alice's voice. Do that for a couple minutes and then we'll be almost done. We'll be finishing up. This tanka that you're going to write eventually is going to remind you of this moment and this experience and help you share that with other people. That's the goal of this particular writing exercise, capturing this moment. One of the fun things about this exercise, and you can do this kind of exercise anytime, is that you as the poet will probably be the only one who remembers this moment, your poem will evoke this moment, but the poem itself will be about things, will be about feelings and colors and smells and sounds and textures and things like that. And so it's that interesting juxtaposition of the internal and the external, if you will. It's kind of what I'm thinking about. So is everybody comfortable for me to move on? Are we good?
Yeah, you're getting
Okay.
nods.
All right, good. Thank you guys for participating in that. So now I want to talk just a little bit about choka, because I have a beautiful example for you. And I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing choka right. It might not be choka, but that's how I am pronouncing it. And I apologize if that's wrong. Choka consists of at least 2 consecutive lines of 5/7 sound units and ends with a line of 5/7/7 sound units. Thus, a choka has to be at least 7 lines in a 5/7, 5/7, 5/7/7 sound unit pattern. I'm going to share with you in just a minute. I'm going to share with you the briefest choka documented, Manyoshu number 802 by Okuru. It was written in the Nara period, so sometime between AD 710 to 794. And I'm going to be using an English translation by Edward Cranston. My chosen choka has 3 5/7 pattern lines, followed by an envoy, which is called a hanka in Japanese, in tanka form of 5/7/7. So this is actually 1 5/7 sound unit line longer than the minimum required, right? Okay, but it's the briefest one that's documented. So it is in a pattern of 5/7, 5/7, 5/7, 5/7/7. And I need to have my side note about hanka or envoy, which is, you could think of it as AKA envoy. That's a more familiar English word. In poetry, it's used as one of several things. It can be a dedicatory poem or postscript about sending a book out to readers. It can be any poem of farewell, including a farewell to life. And it can be a short stanza at the end of a longer poem, used either to address an imagined or actual person or to comment on the preceding poem. Now, in my example, the hanka at the end of my selected poem by Okura is a tanka comment on the first part of his choka. So here, at long last, is the poem, Manyoshu number 802 by Okura. When I eat melons, my children come to mind. When I eat chestnuts, the longing is even worse. Where do they come from, flickering before my eyes, endlessly night after night, not letting me sleep in peace? What are they to me, silver or gold or jewels? How could they ever equal the greater treasure that is a child? They cannot. I just love that. Don't you? Don't you just love that? It's so beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up. I'm almost done. You guys have been so great. Here's some ideas for you to think about doing. Consider creating a haiga, which is, again, haiku with artwork. You could start a haibun diary or travel journal, and a haibun is just haiku mixed with prose. You could pair up and write a renga, linked verse poem. Doesn't have to be between lovers, right? Write alternate stanzas of 5/7/5 and 7/7 sound unit counts in each line. If you do that renga, that would be fun. You could write modern senryu in traditional form of 3 lines with 17 own units. By modern senryu, I mean, using something that's maybe a more serious tone than what original traditional senryu might have been. You could experiment with obsolete waka forms like the katuata, the choka, the sidoka, or the buso kuse kika. Sorry, you'll have to Google those to find out more about them, because I had to cut my presentation down to about a third of what it originally was, because I did talk about those in my original presentation that I was putting together, but man, that's a lot. You can play more with waka/tanka, 5 lines in that 5/7, 5/7/7 sound unit pattern. Hey, you could host a waka party, Utakai or Utaawasi. What could be more fun than that? Can you imagine if we did that? So thank you for your time and attention. I am all done. Whee! Yay! I'll be happy to have any questions or comments or anything like that. But I also don't want to take too much time away from Joe and what's coming next. But thank you guys so much for letting me present at our fall rendezvous. This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Your research is to be lauded, my dear. Great job. Thanks, Alice.
Going down the
Great job.
rabbit hole of Japanese poetry forms, I'm telling you guys, try it. You'll get addicted. You'll find something in it that you just can't resist. It's a wonderful, and I love the fact that these structural things, even though there's math involved in counting, you can play around with the traditional modern styles of these, or the modern styles based on the traditional structures. So it's a lot of fun. Joe Ottinger, you are scaring me to death with that that costume.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alice.